It's really great to have you on, Jilian Godsil, our guest today on Building a Better World podcast. Thanks so much for being here. Excited to hear more about your background and what got you into the space and all the things that you're working on.
Well, thank you. And actually, funnily enough, the tagline of your show, Building a Better World, that is what got me into this space. It absolutely did. So it's very appropriate that I'm here today.
That's awesome. Yeah, we're very, very passionate about our mission. And, the beauty of it is that there's so many people around the world who are in their own way building a better world. And they're really passionate about their work and whatever they're doing. So, this podcast is really dedicated to kind of uncovering those different missions that we all have, and the work that we're doing and kind of see how it all kind of fits together. And, ultimately SuperWorld's a virtual world where literally anything is possible. So we want to cover those stories. So we're really excited to hear your story. Maybe as a start, can you tell us a bit about your background, kind of, start from the beginning, tell us more about kind of how you got here.
Well, I will actually. It's a little bit long, but I'll make it the short version, but it's relevant, right? It actually is relevant. So I had a very traditional background originally. I'm Irish. I was hard on the milk around, went to work for JP Morgan in London. And then I lived in Australia and Singapore working in fintech. Loved it, whatever. I came home, settled down, had my own company. I was still in fintech on the PR side of things. And I bought a big house with my husband in the country and had 2 kids, and I lived happily ever after.
Nice.
Only I didn't.
Oh, okay.
So anyway, I hit divorce and recession at the crash at the same time. And in Ireland, we had the Celtic Tiger immediately before the crash. So it was more violent, if you like, because there was more to fall from, because people had more, they were paying more for things. It was all this craziness, and then bang, it wasn't a smooth landing at all. Anyway, the very short things, a lot of misery going on. And my ex went back to the UK, became bankrupt. But he gave all the debt to myself and our 2 children. So that was my divorce present, right? My first lesson is, or my first piece of advice is, do not get divorced in a recession. Not a good idea. Not a good idea. So anyway, we're there left at home with this big debt. And I tried to sell the house. There was a big house. And I made a little video, and the video went viral. So all of a sudden, because this is 2010, so people weren't selling their property online so much, still a bit new. And I was in the Huffington Post and the New York Times, and I was in Al Jazeera, Russia Today. They made documentaries. It was weird. So I got a cash offer for this house. The little house went viral. The big house went viral. And the banks refused consent to sell. And instead, they preferred to repossess the home. And a few months later, they sold it for a 10th of the value. So it made no sense, right? But in the midst of all that, so that was my own personal horrible stuff. My bailiffs were calling, business was collapsing. I didn't know what was happening. I went from being like never having a library ticket to this craziness happening. And I also got very angry. I became an accidental activist, because at that stage there was this narrative peddled by the banks that said that the ordinary people were gaming the system. Now, we all know that the banks are not exactly the most honorable institutions in the world, far from it, but they were blaming ordinary people for failing financially. So around the time that I'm having my own horrible couple of years, it was worse, I think, for other people, and a lot of men in particular were taking their own lives because they weren't able to support the family. Their homes were being repossessed. They were being blamed for failing financially, as in it was a criminal thing. So I got very angry and very animated, and I ended up I was like rabbiting on radio shows and TV shows and saying, it's not right, it's not right. It hurts a lot to lose, but it's not right to blame people for failing financially. Things can come, and you can't win everything. Yeah. Exactly. So anyway, I ended up, when the banks took my home, I had to go into bankruptcy because I still had the debt. And then I became the first female bankrupt under the new laws. And I knew at that stage, as I was going to the bankruptcy, that I wasn't allowed to run for public office. We'd inherited arcane laws from the UK. And I went, because it was seen as a, you couldn't be a model citizen and be a bankrupt at the same time. It was seen as, again, a crime or shameful thing. So I brought the Irish government all the way to the Supreme Court, High Court and the Supreme Court. And I argued that my constitutional rights have been infringed, that I should be allowed to run for public office. Yeah. And they changed the law. So the next election were the 2014 European parliamentary elections. I ran as an independent. Now I'm broke, I've no money, I'm on the dole, I had to borrow a car, I had no transport, I had no money I had nothing. But it was an amazing, liberating experience running as a politician, very different, I may add. And I ended up, I got 11,500 votes. I topped the independents, I think, for votes, but not enough to get elected, but enough to make a difference. And I went, okay, that's it. My life is done. I've done my bit. I've taken back my agency. I have, done this. Wonderful. But I thought my life was over because what do I do now? And then a couple of years later, I met blockchain. I went, that's what I'm going to do. This is how I make the world a better place. And that's exactly to my original point to you, because I've been through the dot-com boom. And the dot-com boom, yourself, it's great technology, really innovative. They unthink and rethink the world, also great. Yeah. But the difference is in this particular technical revolution, it is making the world a better place. People, the dot-com billionaires, we're not saying, I want to make the world a better place. They said, I want to innovate. I want to be clever. I want to be smart. But innovators in this space, they want to make the world a better place. And it's a genuine feeling. It doesn't always happen. We've had a terrible year of centralized lending institutions and lots of blown up, which has been unfortunate, very unfortunate. But that's how I came to it, because I went, wow, I could see the hugely powerful transformational technology that blockchain offered the world. And I could, because I've been doing all this activism and stuff, and you could see the world was so broken. Like 1% of the world, only 90% of the wealth. That makes no sense. That makes no sense. I mean, and we're living in even crazier times now with Ukraine and the war in Syria, so negatively impacting the poor people who've died there and who are trying to survive there. So we live in a very strange world, but it could be better. And I do think that technology and this blockchain technology, because of the ethos, community, consensus, yes, there's also people want to do well, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be successful, but it's doing it in such a way that it's not dog eat dog. It's all about, I want to succeed, but I want you to succeed at the same time. And why can't we be ethical, responsible, positive employers and entrepreneurs? And yes, let's just make the world a better place. So I love this space. And that's why when I discovered it in 2017, I went hell for leather, and I ended up traveling the world, chairing conferences and advocating for women and speaking on the subject and interviewing people. And it was just, I went, bang, if you like, because it was just amazing. My family thought, what is the matter with Jill? She's traveling all over the world now. She was broke and homeless, only a year ago, and now she's traveling. And it was a great experience. A great 2017, 2018 it was a great time to get into crypto and get into blockchain. And I loved it. So that's kind of a long story, but that's the reason behind it. That's why I'm so passionate about being in this space.
Yeah, and you mentioned a few things earlier about what's different this time, particularly in terms of the nature of blockchain technology and what it enables people to be able to do. Can you go into more detail on that? Like what do you think is the specifics of why in this time, with this kind of evolution of blockchain technology, that the focus is less about just innovation and more about, how do we improve the world, or how do we kind of bring people together and provide accessibility and these other kinds of themes? What makes that different?
Well, I think the financial element has to be key, has to be core, because obviously the ability to transfer peer-to-peer, and I know that certainly back in 2017, when I first was learning about that, the biggest movement of monies in the world is actually remittances from the developed world to the developing world. That's the biggest. It's not aid. Although, mind you, I beg your pardon, with Ukraine, that might be a bit different now with the amount of money that's gone to Ukraine. And of course, people have been fleeced. They're taking weeks, so they charge big fees, and you might think, oh, it's only like $50 fee, but if you're sending back $100, that's a big fee. So I just think there's that whole opportunity to think that we don't need old fiat money. I mean, and I'm not an anarchist by any stretch of the imagination, middle-aged, middle-class mum who fell on hard times, right? But it's so, whoa, isn't that interesting? You have all the big elites that control the world and control things like taxation. So you have the CEO paying a fraction of the tax compared to his secretary, compared to even his other managers, and it's that inequalities that perpetuate and are created again and again and again. And I'm going, well, why is it like that? And why should fiat be? Why should people who have all this money be able to make the rules? Now that sounds like a really stupid question. Of course, people with money make the rules, but you know what? Maybe they couldn't. Maybe using technology and our own funny money, you could replace things like that. And it's wow, isn't that? Because we've kind of gone back into feudal times now. The people, like when my parents were married, they had 6 kids, and they put us all through private school. Now, they were not rich by any stretch of the imagination, but they chose not to have foreign holidays or flash cars. They chose to put it all to the kids instead. But that was a choice they could make, because mom didn't work. Mom was a stay-at-home mom. And you can't do it now. Certainly not in the developing world, not in Dublin. You can't do it in Ireland. You can't do it in most countries. People have to work. I hear we have a huge crisis where they can't afford childcare, they can't afford to buy a home. Kids are living at home with their parents. Kids, I mean, in their 30s. So the world is a bit weird. And this is like, Ireland is a fairly stable, well-regulated country. And there's all these things happening. So it's like, whoa. So I love the idea that you could say, we could do something different. And do you ever hear about the Brixton pound?
No, I haven't. What's that about?
It was just an experiment they did. It was pre-crypto. It was nothing to do with crypto. But they said, Brixton was a bit of a rundown area in London. Or is it London? Maybe I was north. But it wasn't actually London, but it was outside. But anyway, it was a rundown area. So they said, let's print our own pound. And they had like David Bowie came from Brixton. So they had like famous people on it. And they used it. And if you use the Brixton pound as opposed to the sterling, you get discounts in local businesses. So this is like this printed money. It wasn't, it was just an experiment. And it was very successful because it meant that money was spent in the locality. That's kind of clever. And I think Hedera Hashcraft, I think, is talking to them about maybe putting it onto a blockchain. Maybe I'm not quite sure how far they got. 2020, they were doing something there. But what I love, you said about what is the difference? Finance is the core of everything. And I know, having been a successful woman, professional woman who didn't worry about money. Now, I wasn't rich by any means, but I had no money worries whatsoever. I had holidays, we had apartments abroad, kids, we had a big house. Comfortable, no money worries. And then spending about 13 years on the bread zone, almost, like on the bread line. That's horrible. Going to the supermarket and not knowing. And once actually, I didn't have enough money in my credit, on my debit card. I didn't have a credit debit card. My daughter, who was very young, which was a young teenager, was mortified. I had to go home and find some extra money to finish off the shop. Now and when you're that close, I mean, don't be wrong, I was never on the streets, ran on the streets, but when you're constantly fighting just to get money, just to pay for ordinary things, it's very hard to do the thinking up here about why is it wrong. Very hard to have a revolution. And again, I'm not an anarchist or a revolutionary or anything like that, but it's very hard to have even like a velvet revolution. If you're thinking down here, because you're so busy trying to feed people. And that's why this thinking in this space, because you kind of go, oh, I never thought of it that way. Oh, well, that's interesting. And it makes you unthink the things that we were brought up with. Well, I was brought up with norms that were just considered, that's the way it is,
Yeah, it is the life experience of dealing with the problem, whatever it is in our lives, that helps you really have empathy for not only the problem, but for people around you that are also suffering from a similar fate, and makes you really passionate about figuring out ways, once you've, in your case, gotten the knowledge about what this technology can do, really passionate about how we can use it to make sure this doesn't happen. And I love the fact that you're, again, a big supporter of leadership and women particularly getting into this space. I'd love to hear more about kind of the work that you're doing with BlockLeaders. And I know you were recently recognized as one of the top 100 women of the future.
I said that to my mom, and she said, do you think the meaning of today is a future belong to somebody else? I said, well, you could have a good point there. I'm very excited to be in this space. And I when I give my talks about advocacy for women in the space and diversity in general, but just women in particular, I often start with a little very bad joke that goes, if the Lehman Brothers had been the Lehman sisters, we might not have had the financial crash. So we all know that diversity, having women in there, it makes a big difference, right? Now, this technology, as I've said earlier in this conversation, it's way too important to be left to men alone. Way too important. And it's not, but I mean, when I say men, I mean, that's the tip of the iceberg. It's the whole spectrum. So it's diversity in every hue, color, creed, sexuality, binary, non-binary, whatever you want to be. We want you all in there because it's too important to waste on people who think the same way, because the people who think the same way are the ones who created the world the way it is. And if you're only mixing with people who think, you're in that bubble, it's very hard for you to think outside the box. And one example I give in terms of this is that I was very fortunate. I mentioned that mom and dad decided that they would not have foreign holidays or whatever, we stayed in Ireland at the time, and to pay for the education. So that was a decision they made, which gave me a great privilege. It's a great privilege. Privately educated is a huge privilege, not only in the standard of schooling that you get, also in the networks that you create, and you go on, I went to Trinity, and all, it's just the networks. I know, I am not a millionaire by long, but I know people who are millionaires. You don't get that unless you go on that particular path. And then I look at other people who don't have that. And I've always been a very hardworking person. I work extremely hard, but I started up here. Now compare that to somebody maybe who started down here, maybe it was a single mom, or with the parents who didn't believe in education, and maybe had a couple of kids before they were 20, didn't finish schooling, didn't get any education, didn't manage to, spread their wings and show their talents. And maybe people don't get chances, and people who do work very hard. I started up here. And again, it wasn't that I said we're not well off or anything like that, but it's still that education was a huge gap. And if someone's down here, it's very hard to work to up to here before you can go on afterwards. And so I think being in this space, it allows, there's lots of things that, for example, I went to a beautiful university, Trinity College in Dublin, very grateful, loved my 4 years there.
Yeah.
Adored it. I did history and English, majored in history, adored it. But if people don't have access to university, and this is like a world-class university on the doorstep, how do they get their recognition, their accreditation, their awards and recognition, and people say, oh, it's true. And that's what the blockchain, you see with blockchain education, people are able to register certification, they can do distance learning, they can do a whole bunch of things, and they get experience working with startups, with companies. And all of a sudden, they can work from whether it's India, Singapore, or Ireland, and they have the same opportunity. So even though I'm very privileged, that word again, and very happy to have gone to Trinity, it really was an amazing experience. But I'm very glad that there are other ways for people to achieve and to succeed. And I don't know what the role of the university will be going forward in the future. It's hard to know, except that it's an amazing social experience. But I love the fact that people who you don't have to go through a traditional educational university experience to rack up your talent and your accreditations and then apply for jobs and work remotely if necessary. So that's kind of exciting. That wouldn't have happened pre-blockchain, I don't think.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of things that I think have been transformed in how people are now kind of thinking about education and the future of work. And we just had Esther O'Callaghan.
I know her.
Yeah,
she's amazing
on the show, and we were talking about how the education and how employers are going to hire people is really going to be more about what can you do, and what can you what skills do you have, instead of just looking at your CV. They're going to be able to kind of evaluate you on different kind of factors. So yeah, I definitely think it's how a lot of things are transforming using this technology. You kind of talked about it a bit, but I'm just curious, when was the first time you got your first exposure to blockchain? How did you first hear about Bitcoin or blockchain in general?
Well, I actually heard about it in 2014. I went to a talk a friend had organized in Dublin, and it went over my head. I said, that's a nice talk. That's nice, lovely. Thought no more about it. And then in 2017, I was working on another software project, and the same guy I was working, he said, come to this meeting. And this is the ICO madness at the time, right?
Yeah.
And he said, what we're going to do, it was a horse-based project, because Ireland, the land of the horse and racing horses and whatever, the whole shebang. And they're going to put the horses on the blockchain and raise loads of money, and none of that happened. But so I came in, it's kind of crazy. I went, this is weird. But at the same time, a friend of mine was the editor of CryptoCoin.news, I think it is, Simon Cocking. And he was editing that. And I said to him, because I knew him from before, I'd written fintech for him before as a journalist. And I said, how do I learn about this? And he said, well, do you want to review some white papers? Now, white papers are death by white papers. I hate white papers, but it was a great way to learn, to try to read all this stuff and try to understand, because it is, even though I did fintech all my life, into blockchain, it's a big jump. It's just the whole boundaries. It's a huge jump. I found it quite hard at the start. And the other nice thing too as well was that Simon had been previously traveling a lot, chairing conferences and speaking at conferences, but he had a young family. So when he got some invites came through, and he said, do you want to do that? So my first one was in Kyiv, actually, funnily enough, in the Ukraine. And it was 2018. It was a fashion on the blockchain conference. And
what?
Fashion on the blockchain conference.
Oh, okay. I think I was at that one.
No way.
Yeah, I
That's
spent a
back.
lot of time in Kyiv. So
Oh, no way.
yeah. I started a venture capital fund there back in 2011. So I was there. I
You,
think that was 2018, maybe.
yeah, that would be right. Well,
Yeah.
that's mad. Well, that was my first conference that I went to, and I was only speaking. I wasn't chairing it, but
Okay.
it was my first experience. I went, oh my goodness! And then also, I was used to going to fintech conferences. Now, fintech conferences are fine, they're fine. And then you go to blockchain conferences, and they're mad, and they're great crack. They're a lot of fun. And then you go to NFT conferences, and they're even crazier again. So it's just the fun. I love going to conferences now because I would know a lot of people on the circuit because I've either interviewed them or I've met them, whatever. And then but the energy is very different. It's a great buzzy. It's really good energy. I love those conferences.
Yeah, no, those are great, especially conferences in Kyiv. They always definitely add a whole different level. I love it there. I can't wait till Ukraine is back to normal. Let's
Yeah, please God, it'll happen sooner rather than later.
Yeah. But they have a very strong blockchain and Web3 community there. You've also had a lot of experience on the journalism side and PR, et cetera, in covering a lot of stories. And last year has been a very interesting year in terms of
Broke my heart.
Discovering a lot of different things that are happening in the space. Well, talk to me a little bit more about the field of journalism as it relates to this world.
Well, do you know what's interesting? They always say it's an ill wind that brings no good. So when I went through all the craziness, prior to that, I did history in English in Trinity. I worked in PR for many years, about 15 years, whatever. And then I hit the activism and the craziness, and I started writing. I was writing a lot of op-eds, mad, crazy op-eds in the Irish Independent about social injustice and stuff like that. So I began to make myself a name as this raving, loony, lefty, angry woman. And that was a great experience. And then when I moved into Web3, the natural thing was to do it with writing. And you learn that way too as well. And I loved it. So in answer to your question about last year, one of the things that I love to do, it's my passion, and I would do it all day, every day, all night, is founder interviews. I love founder interviews. I love people. And I admire founders because they're smart people. They've got these original ideas, and I love chatting to them. I love finding out what makes them tick. So again, go back to last year. I had been a bit of a fangirl with Alex Mashinsky. I'd met him and I'd interviewed him several times, and I believed him because I actually absolutely believed him. And that broke my heart because I just thought, oh no, when that all blew up and all the stuff that came out afterwards. And I just thought, oh my God. So that was perhaps not my most professional moment because I believed him. I was so excited about Celsius. I was so excited. Whereas with Do Kwon, that didn't really impinge me so much because that was pure FOMO stuff. It wasn't helping ordinary folk. And even like the FTX was more, again, a commercial thing that blew up. And although I know you, man, Naz, Naz Daily, the Israeli podcaster, I met him actually in New York there recently, but he did a piece on Sam. But he went back and did another piece on Sam to correct his stuff, whatever. But it happens, and I think we understand that it was due to centralized. The DeFi kept on trundling along. It was a centralized, and human beings at the core, and human beings maybe starting off wanting to write and then not so. So that's I think is, and as a journalist, going back to that thing, I mean, it was a great privilege for me to be able to say I get to interview a lot of people. So I've interviewed Alex Mashinsky, but I've also interviewed John McAfee, who I loved. I know he was a bit crazy. I loved him, and Don Tapscott, and there's quite on the top of the leaders of the space that I've met and interviewed. It's a great privilege to be there, but it is, it is sad when one of your heroes, and that Celsius thing, that really spoke to me because, again, I was a single mom. I just thought, oh, I can put my little bit of crypto in there and I don't sell it, and I can, and it's helping people, and it's all the right things were being said. And then that upset me. So that was more of a personal thing. If I was a cold, stone cold journalist, we would have just written the news. But I got excited about that. I thought, oh, this is where the future comes into play. So yikes.
Yeah, I guess it's part of this world of uncovering kind of these stories and I think like you said, the centralization of a lot of the things that we were thinking were more decentralized or moving to be more decentralized, were still the points of failure. What do you think is where we're going now that we know, some of these issues that we've had in the industry? People are now more aware that they need to, be concerned about where they're storing their crypto, and be more cognizant of being more decentralized in terms of their wallet infrastructure, et cetera. Do you think people are making that change, or the mainstream, we're in this space, so, I think we're a little bit more aware, but what do you think about the mainstream user? Are they picking up on this, or are they just kind of going?
It's hard to know.
Yeah.
It's hard to know. And I think also, like, obviously mainstream adoption, which is not mainstream user, we want it to be easy. So we want them not to think about whether it's decentralized or not. You really want to, like, open up a PayPal account or a Revolut or one of those neobanks. But so I do think there is definitely room for regulation so that these things can't happen. Now, I'm not very convinced of the current round of regulations coming out of the SEC, and then it's just because it smacks of just all the layers of problems with the FTX engagements, and oh my goodness. So I think regulation, but the right regulation, and how do we get that? That's hard to know too as well. I'm not a regulator. I've met some fine people, like John Salmon. He's a solicitor with Hogan Lovells, very interesting man out of the UK, and he had some really, he talks quite a lot. He has a lot of interesting things to say about regulation, but it has to be right. You can't mix up oranges and apples and expect them to get the same result. So you can't expect crypto to act the same way as fiat. But mind you, also at the end of the day too as well, again, we know this, that there is more money laundering done in fiat than there is in crypto. Trillions and trillions more. And that's kind of conveniently overlooked. People go, oh, it's all the bad stuff that's happening. So yes and no. I think it needs to get easier, but it needs to be regulated so that it's safe. I think that's also why Celsius was so attractive. It was very easy to use. It was very, very easy to use. It felt like a Facebook interface. It just felt grand. And so we need regulation so you can trust what it is that you're using, but you don't need to know what you're using, because no one wants to care about, let's look at the code behind this. I mean, who's going to do that? Average punter certainly won't.
Yeah. That's I guess the issue is that the more centralized approaches are just generally easier. And the DeFi and more decentralized infrastructure is still getting there in terms of usability, and that's something that we try to focus on at SuperWorld, is how do we make it really easy for users to get on board in terms of what we're doing and get into the metaverse. But at the same time, every user has their own preferences for how they prefer to get into crypto, and it's a matter of kind of making sure that everyone's kind of educated as to what those differences are, until we have better solutions. What do you think of this year? I mean, versus last year? I know we see a little bit of hopefully some rebounding that's happening in the industry, or some stability compared to the end of last year. What's your thoughts on where we're going over this year, or the next year, the next few years?
Well, I'd be quietly optimistic, and I think today, did Bitcoin hit 25 today? I think something popped up on my screen. But I'd be quietly optimistic.
I'm excited about that.
Yeah.
That's great.
I mean, obviously that'll bring everything up, and it'll give more money to come into the system, and people be able to buy things and invest in things and develop stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, I'm all in on the system. Last year was a horrible year in terms of, like, bad things to happen. But then also, having said that, there was a lot of building went on last year. So there was, I'm recovering projects going, oh, that's interesting. So a lot of good stuff happening, and then the bad stuff overtook it. So I would be optimistic, because I think at the end of the day, again, going back to this thing, apart from the people, there are bad actors everywhere in fiat and in crypto, but there are a lot of people in crypto and Web3 who want to make the world better, and I think that will prevail, because there's a huge, and again, I think I stress, it's not a hippy dippy, oh, let's share everything out. It's like, let's be successful. let's do it in an honorable way. There's no reason you can't make money, but be a decent person and do good in your community and look after your employees, make good product. That's not counterproductive to being successful. In fact, oftentimes if you do all those things, you keep your customers be happy, your employees will be happy, and you end up with better workspace, better, things all improve, I think, in those cases. So I am very optimistic, but then I have to say, warning alert, Jilly is always optimistic. So I'm known for like, oh, isn't this wonderful? Rose-tinted glasses. So I do get excited, but yeah, no, it'll work out in the end. I know it will.
Well, I share that with you. I mean, I'm super optimistic about the world, SuperWorld, right? And, I think that we definitely have to look at the challenges we have, but again, look at them in the light of that there's so many opportunities to make things better and that we should go towards those things. And so
otherwise you may as well give up, give up, off you go. Otherwise, if you don't have hope that
long-term horizon, long-term thinking.
Yeah, and I don't know if you have children, but I've grown up kids, so I want them to have a really nice world. I want them to enjoy it and be successful at what they want to do.
No, I have 2 kids, and I always often say in terms of what we're doing with SuperWorld is, again, we're a virtual world that's focused on enhancing your real life, and what we want to do is keep people in the real world, in the physical world. I see these kids that are slowly kind of being pulled into virtuality, and they're not, out there doing things. And so that's kind of, I think a lot of kids are just kind of stuck on social media or stuck playing a video game. And so as I think of technology and kids, I think there's ways to kind of create and build everything that we're doing in a way that's very humane. So that kind of recognizes not only the positive uses of this technology, but in a way that is positive for all of us and also positive for the world. So those are things that really kind of I'm passionate about, and we're passionate about at SuperWorld. I want to, you mentioned that, I think this whole talk of this whole interview that, it's really about building a better world and providing accessibility. This technology definitely does that. What are ways that you think that as we build more tools, make things easier, how do we get groups that might not yet be using this technology, blockchain, DeFi, crypto, metaverse? What's the best way to start, bringing all of this to a greater number of people, minorities, groups of people that don't have as much access?
Well, I think the base premise for people building the space is that they want to be inclusive. I think there's very few products I've come across that are just for white, bald men, for the sake of argument, whatever. Most people want to make things that are better. And what I really like, for example, I did some work recently with a neurodiverse community in the UK. And I was interviewing stuff for the Irish Times on it. And I learned a huge amount, because I think I'm quite neuro neutral, I think it is, whatever. But there's such a spectrum of people's ability and where they are. And neurodiverse is great because diversity, as we now know, can bring greater things. A neurodiverse person can be a lot more valuable as a team member than a neuro neutral person, as I am. And the problem has been traditionally, how does a neurodiverse person get onto the team? Because if they are typical neurodiverse, it means that they might be very bad at interview technique, eye contact, empathy. They might like to work in an office. They could be very awkward, but they have this amazing brain and different way of looking at things that would be hugely powerful for an organization. So when you have people looking at things like neurodiversity, because apparently in the UK, against all UK-based analysis and research that I was doing, only 18% of neurodiverse people are employed. That's shocking, because it means they haven't been able to get work, or through different reasons, whatever, they haven't been matched up. So going back to the technology, when you have a group of people who are working to develop ways that are rethinking the world, dismantling, we've always done it this way, disruption, and then you also have at the same time, there's this embracement by society in general of like mental health issues, for example, neurodiversity, LGBTQ plus community, all these different things that people are embracing. I know there are things that have been brought to the table, and then you got a community that's building. There's a natural overlap, and people are going to say, oh, and also because this technology comes in the middle of the time post-pandemic, where we're working remotely, so there's a lot of the hybrid model lends itself to a lot more be able to include people, whether you are geographically dispersed and not very well off, but you have access to the internet, or whether you live in the middle of London, but you're neurodiverse and you don't go near an office. So it's kind of, it's a little bit woolly that my question, I answer I'm giving you, but I do think because you have this, I'm going to call it not wokeness because that's got bad connotations now, but this awareness of different types of people who can contribute to the world, and this technology that actually wants to include those people. So I think it's happening. It's happening across different things. Like even I did something about a supply chain project. It was Suka was called a number of years ago. And one of the things that struck me was that as consumers in the Western world, we're very conscious. We're conscious about how we buy and what we buy, and that like I buy a lot of charity shop stuff now, and but people aren't. My kids are big into recycled stuff, and you know it's a different way of thinking rather than fast fashion or whatever. So the person, in order to have that, you need somebody at the far end of the supply chain who's making or growing or doing whatever they're doing, whether it's food or fashion, to input the data. So the data can be read all the way along up, and then people can say, oh, this is actually made by this person or made here, whatever. And the nice thing is that, again, how it's going to make a difference is the person who's actually supplying the data that's needed, because the consumer who has the dollar as the buying power is looking for it. And the person at the far end who is the most vulnerable, they're getting paid to do this, not top of the regular work. They're getting paid. It could be in tokens, it could be in other stable coins, but they're getting paid. And then the one thing that really struck me was, that's really interesting because there's a bit of a right and balance of power. And then this chap I was saying, he said, you know what, they can use those tokens perhaps to save it or to get a microloan. And he said, of course, a microloan to somebody in a developing country might be like $50. That's a microloan. To them, it's their entire year's supply of seed. And when you start to think, oh wow, that's changing stuff, and then also all the whole finance thing. I mean, can you imagine living in a world where you don't have a bank account, you can't get credit, all these things that you need to buy a car, to buy a house, to go on holidays, pay for your kids' education, and like you can't get credit. So it's because it's disrupting so many traditional industries and way of thinking about stuff. It's that's where I get the most excited. It's the change thinking, like oh, because when someone said to me we should separate state and money, I went, then sure, here in Ireland we only learned this century to separate church and state. Now most modern thinkers would definitely separate church and state. Doesn't matter what region you are, you think that could be different. And then with church, state and money, that's interesting. But why not? Why should the state be controlling the money? Why couldn't there be the community or consensus or an agreement or whatever? Things to think upon.
Yeah, definitely. I think that this is opening up a new way that people are starting to think about their relationship with the currencies that we use, as well as the brands or the businesses that we interact with, how we can interact with our community, whether it's geographic or it's across the world, certain interests groups, etc. That's something that we're really passionate about at SuperWorld, as well as how do we, again, not only enable this kind of new, way of transacting, but also how do we enable new ways of becoming a stakeholder, whether it's in geospatial land around you and owning virtual real estate covering Earth, or being able to utilize Web3 to engage your customers as a business, as well as you as an individual or part of an organization, being able to engage with your community using these tools. I think that as we give more people the access to not only Web3, but just these other technologies inherent in the metaverse, we see what's going on with generative AI. We're all being very empowered in different ways, and we need to learn how to use that power I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about what's happening in the AI field, and if you've been keeping up with Chat GPT and
very handy. I used it several
Yeah.
times to rephrase stuff that I wanted to be
Okay.
rephrased. I said, here's a press release maybe. I said, you know what, let's just throw it in there and see it come, because otherwise I'd have to do it. That's time. I do not enjoy doing that unless I'm adding value to it.
Yeah.
But Jillian did too as well recently, because during the lockdown too as well, people made bread and did the garden, but I didn't do that. But I started painting, and then I started doing stuff. I had a lot of fun doing that, and I made them to NFT.
What kind of painting?
Well, I have this. My kids were saying to me, I always doodle ladies, just women, just doodle women, and they're usually sitting, and I just had this. I don't know, it's like a meme that I do. I just doodle it. So I started painting them. I had a lot of fun, and actually, I'm not where I'm living now, but I framed them all. IKEA framed them, put them all up on the wall, which is a bit strange. That's what I had. So it was such fun. But another thing that I did was, just before I said my house was repossessed by the banks back in 2010, whatever it was. And before I gave up the keys, well, they took them. A friend of mine said, "Do you want to do a naked shoot in your house?" And I said, "Why not?" So it was very tasteful. Now it was very tasteful. It was showing really. It was a lot of fun. Like it was a nice old Georgian house. So I was photographed all over the place. It was a lot of fun. And anyway, going back to the art, there was this project I was working on, ArtMine, and you took loads of photographs, and then you would train the AI model to do stuff with the paintings. So I had about 40 of these shots left over from the nude shoot. And again, it was so tame, but it was fun to have done. And it created these amazing amorphous building and woman. Because the house we'd rescued it one day, so it was a really emotional thing when the banks took it, because it was about to be knocked down. We rescued it. It was beautiful 8-bedroom, 8-bathroom Georgian manor house, and 3-story over basement with a lovely. It was beautiful. But it was about to be knocked down when we saved it and did it up, and then the banks took it. It was like horrible. But I had such fun, and I've sold about 300 of them. I think I'm at least $300 up. I think, but it was just such fun to do it, and that's, people talk a lot about AI and the downside, whatever. But that was kind of fun, because I thought, oh, okay, so I'm being an artist. It's my photographs. I'm training the AI, and now I've got these beautiful images. So I'm embracing it. I think I think human beings will be okay.
No, I agree. I think it's really important to embrace every new technology and to try to jump in and be, as interactive with it as possible. And that's how you get to, understand it and use it and benefit from it. You can't be afraid of it, for sure. And I don't think it's I think it's only additive to us doing more and more higher level types of work. So, and it's going to add jobs.
Could I interrupt there? Sorry, I did an interview with a lady some time ago, and she was working with premature babies in Cork. And what she was doing was she was using AI, because they hadn't up until then taken all the data with the premature babies and put it through, all the data into databases and analyze it. And she said the AI, the work that was just phenomenal, because it pushed them on. The AI could analyze and take all that data and crunch it up and come out with things that humans would take years to do. And second, she said, although it takes a human being, a doctor, to be able to look after a premature baby, but the AI didn't get tired. The AI never slept. So as a help for her work with the real other doctors, she said it was phenomenal. So things like that are going to be amazing. Or old folk maybe living by themselves and have those AI robots. So okay, they're by themselves, but they can have an interaction. They have a conversation, like a chat GPT conversation, and that's kind of interesting too as well. That so people would have more. I'm not saying that it's ideal to be living by yourself and chatting to a robot. I'm not saying that's obviously ideal, but it would be better than not chatting to anybody. And it could also provide information and feedback. And so there are lots of practical implementations, I think, of AI that are amazing, that are just going to, but they're already there all the time. I mean, when I type, they automatically fills in the rest of my sentence for me, which is very handy when I'm doing an email or something, maybe not when I'm writing poetry, but I'm doing an email. That's handy. That helps me move along. So I think it's better than not good.
No, there's with Chat GPT 4 and 5, and just it's going to get pretty incredible what you can create. So I'm very excited about that. Again, we want people to create content and be able to place content in real world locations. So I can't wait till, we can integrate some of that tooling into SuperWorld, see what people are going to create around them. I'm going to kind of close by asking you a couple of more fun questions as well, just to get your thoughts on who would you want to go to lunch with if you could invite anyone to lunch, anyone around now or in history, in the world, who would you invite, and what would you want to learn?
Oh, well, given our conversation, Satoshi.
Nice.
Whether he, she, them, whatever. And it'd be kind of fun just to get their feedback on how they thought it was working out. What was their original vision? And I mean, obviously it's pretenders to the crown, we won't mention here now, but is it working the way, and also it'd be quite nice to meet him, he, she, they, whatever, to figure out if I could help, if their vision, because their vision, I believe in their vision, as in that was it was theirs. And if perhaps they could give the world some guidance about things that we're messing up and things we can do better. That'd be really nice to be able to come back and say, guys, here's the 10 commandments from the mountain. Do you know what? We got to do this, this, and this, and we'll make it all good again. So that would be my person to meet.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a really good question too. I wonder what the answer to that question would be. Because I'm sure
it would help us, wouldn't it? It would help us get things right or better. I think it would help us, people who want to get things right, say, I'm going in the wrong direction. Let's go in this direction. Yeah.
Yeah. And I wonder if he, she, them, even anticipated all the things that have come about from this original vision. So it's very exciting. All right. So, and one more question is, we're SuperWorld. So again, virtual world covering Earth, where you can, buy any location on Earth and become a stakeholder there. Where in the world, if you could acquire any place, any virtual real estate anywhere in the world, where is your favorite place in the world?
I've got 4 answers. Okay. Sorry, whoops, because I have 3 little pieces of virtual land. The first one is in Merces. I put a little shop there. It's a game attached to the Wax blockchain. So I need to go back. It's a small little game, but it was kind of fun. And I like the guy who's building there. Second time was that I got a house in Metropolis, which is out of the UK. The Ajani brother and sister set it up. So it's full of DJs and very famous people. But I was going to say, from homelessness to a house in Metropolis, up in the area, it's lovely. And the third place that I have already, it's coming out next week, is that my business colleague and I, Lisa, we're launching the first Irish pub in the metaverse in Sandbox. So that's happening. I know it's happening next for Paddy's weekend, next weekend, awesome. Next do that. But if I were to have something, I know what I'd like. I'd like my children, well, my one daughter in particular, but they both have horses. And we've got rescue horses and no land. So I would like a large chunk of land and with virtual land where I could somehow support the rescue horses. And I don't know, I could like make a big equestrian facility in south of Dublin, in Wicklow. That would be
Dublin. Okay.
Yeah, that would be my thing too. And then maybe use that to buy a real equestrian center, because my daughter teaches with special needs kids and stuff. That we're using equine-led therapy. So and she also wants to do equine rehabilitation and retirement for horses too as well. So I'll start off with the virtual one, and then somehow I'll make it work so that I end up with, I can buy a nice little equestrian center in Wicklow.
Yeah, that's great. So you would definitely find a spot there to start building virtually, and then also start doing more things physically there. That's great that your daughter's in that area of work as well. Recently was with someone who's in the horse racing space, who is also interested in similar ideas, because more people need to know about the sport and get into it. And that was something that she had talked to me a long time about. So very cool. Very cool. Well, it's great to
thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for being here. I'd love to tell our audience, where is the best place for them to learn more about your work, and how do they find you online?
I think LinkedIn is probably the easiest. So my name, it's spelled a bit funnily, Jillian with a J and Godsil with a G, Godsil. So that would be the best spot where I have conversations. I'm on Twitter too as well, same my name, because it's very funny. I laugh when I go into Telegram or go into Discord, whatever, and everyone's got their the icons, whatever. They haven't got the no faces, and they got funny names. And I'm going, I am so boring. I have my face and I have my name. And I'm a journalist, so it's important. But even still, it's like, oh, I feel boring. I should have a fancy name, and I should have a sort of another, I don't know, strange cartoon for my face. But anyway, so yes, but LinkedIn and Twitter. But LinkedIn is probably the better one for business connections. I'll chat to people there.
Awesome. I think your name's really fancy, so that's awesome.
Well, I'm lucky. My brothers used to get teased about Godzilla, but I'm a girl, so I didn't really get that thing. So it's
yeah, kids, they're always like that. But no, it's really nice to meet you. Excited for all the work that you do and you've done to help grow this space. So really appreciate you coming on our podcast today, and thanks again for all the stuff that you're doing to build a better world. So thanks so much, Jillian.
Oh, thank you. It's a great time to be alive. Thank you very much indeed for having me on. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to talking again soon.